profession, he instantly replies that it is worst to be an Indian farmer. We born and we die. We would never flourish and better off in the society. His words often feels like a sense of restlessness for me, that why this section of society, why farmers has always been worsened off since independence, why the policies of the government are not able to uplift the farmers for the past 70 years, and why the policies have always been oppressive for us. So for today's discussion, we have with us Sangeet Toor ma'am, who is a cybersecurity analyst and a writer based in Chandigarh. She is currently documenting the history of land rights and peasant struggles in Punjab. Our second speaker is Navpreet ma'am, who teaches economics at Janki Devi Memorial College, Delhi University. Both of them are closely studying the protest and considering their extensive engagement with the farm protest and participation of women. It would truly be an honor for us to have you here. Thank you, both of you. Firstly, I call Navpreet ma'am, and there are some set of questions which we have already mailed her, and I am reading all of them so that there is no sense of interruption in between. So the first question for Navpreet ma'am is, considering an enormous participation of women in the entire farm protest, are women natural constituents of the farmer class? If yes, is their participation in the protest driven by a sense of class consciousness? The second question is, how do the recent farm laws impact farmers in general and women farmers in particular? Moreover, how does the participation of women impact the entire farm law protest and the seriousness with which it has been perceived? The third question is, how do you look at the politics of a feminist assertion of their socio-economic identities by women in the ongoing protest? So these are three questions for Navpreet ma'am. I again welcome you, ma'am. Now mic is yours.
Thank you, Kiran. So I'll first start with briefly with three laws, and then afterwards I'll explain their impact, and then we will discuss about their impact on women. Okay. So now the first of the three laws, the farmers have been protesting against the three laws which have been promulgated, or the government passed those in September. And after, along with that, they are also protesting against the electricity bill, which in the recent talks, government has agreed to not to introduce that in the parliament. So therefore, we will be focusing on the three laws and their impact. So now the first one of these is the Farmers Produce, Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act 2020. This act allows sales and purchase outside the Agricultural Produce Market Committee, otherwise known APMCs, APMC mandis, and this also allows a parallel or proposes a parallel system of private mandis. With the introduction of parallel system of private mandis, that would increase the bargaining power or relative bargaining power of corporate agribusinesses vis-a-vis farmers. So now, apart from this, the APMC mandis, which were established in order to safeguard farmers against the predatory practices of agricultural traders and other intermediaries. And APMC mandis, they also assisted farmers to get the remunerative prices for their produce, for agriculture produce. And still there are only certain part of our country where farmers are able to sell their produce at the government given or government announced minimum support price. A large share of them are still not able to get the minimum support price, leave alone the price that exceeds the MSP. So now this is that this largely happens on account of that there is a little expenditure, or the state is the expenditure in terms of procurement or agriculture. There is a limited agriculture procurement is done by the state governments and also by the central governments. And apart from this, the APMC mandis, there used to be, state used to collect a tax on that under the current previous provisions. And the text was used for building infrastructure, rural infrastructure, that is in the rural areas closely related or closely connected to the mandis. Now, the present provision, the new act, doesn't have such provisions, so which will also affect the infrastructure in the rural areas. So now the second bill, that is the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement of Price Assurance and Farm Service Act 2020. So that is amended, otherwise known as Contract Farming Act. So that is amended to include multinational corporation to have an unregulated role in the process of contract farming for production of farm produce. Along with that, also to in the agriculture and allied activities. So now this is that contract farming will draw adverse impact, and we will briefly discuss about that while we go ahead. That is how they are going to affect the income of Indian farmers. And apart, so that is so far. And then in that case, uh, if there are any disputes after this implementation of this act, so as per the provisions of this act, those will be dealt by subdivisional magistrates. So those dispute cases will be dealt by subdivisional magistrate, and which has been, if we look at also the current structure, and we so that is that this kind of structure will be very highly skewed in favor of private entities, and individual farmers will not be able to have resources to stand against these mighty farmers. So now the third law, that is Essential Commodity Amendment Act 2020. So in this, there is a stock quantity and supply regulation that the private entities could could keep, that could pertain. So now that has been amended. So now allowing the private entities, particularly large agribusiness firms, to maintain large stocks. And they have, under this act, what has been done is that the government has delisted certain commodities, certain essential commodities such as cereals, pulses, potatoes, onions, edible oils, and other essential commodities, and allowing private players to maintain stock with no limits. So now in those cases, when can the government intervene? The government is only going to intervene in very extraordinary situation as per this law, and that is either there is famine, or if there is a war, or if there are other natural calamities. And in case of perishable goods, and or if there are very high prices, where in case of perishable good, if the price is 100% higher than the retail prices, is, or in case of non-perishable good, if it's a 50% higher than the retail prices. So now this would also, what is going to happen is that this would result into, or this will create a inflation on in the food items. So now this is going to have multiple impacts on our economy. It will affect not only the, it will bring a question on the food security, but it is also going to affect the livelihood, income, employment in the rural as well as in the urban areas. Now, after the implementation of these acts, and as that has happened historically as well, that is that whenever there is a more control, or there are more private corporate sector is involved in those cases, so there is a tendency to shift away from food crops. So there will be a larger production. So there will be shift in the area under cultivation from food crops to the export oriented crops, resulting into a decline in this food supply in our country, which, if we look at, that is the, which will further aggravate the problem of malnutrition. Apart from that, since as part of these acts, after implementation of these acts, the state will not be involved in the procurement process. When state is not going to procure the food crops, so therefore state will not be able to continue with the policies such as public distribution system, or otherwise midday meal, etc. So such food policies related to food and nutrition. And apart from that, if the private entities will be allowed to maintain unregulated stocks, so that would increase, that would result into rise in the prices of food grains. So that is combined effect of these will be that there will be lesser food available to the population, and the prices of food will also increase in our economy. Now, other than this will also affect the income and the livelihood of our population. That even prior to, if we look at that, 82% of Indian farmers are small and marginal farmers, and agriculture was becoming unviable for a larger section of farmers even prior to these laws. So now, why was it becoming unviable? It was largely on account of increasing cost of cultivation. Now, along with that, there has been a decline in the public investment, and there's a decline in subsidies, and state is not able to provide agriculture extension services. So that combined effect of these has been that farmers, for a large section of farmers, agriculture was becoming non-viable. So now, if in this case, if we have more unregulated access uh, of of our market, if we give that unregulated access to private entities, that would result both direct access and also through the contract farmings. So that would result into a decline in the price levels and what are prevalent price levels right now in the market, plus the provisions of contract farming. It is important to understand that as part of the contract farming, the contract firm, the contracting agency, also insist on using, not only on providing them the produce, but also insist on using the seeds input provided by these contract farming agencies. Now, if this continues, so therefore they're not only going to monopolize the market, that is of the produce market, but they will also control and monopolize the input market. When there will be control only in few hands in case of input market, that would further increase the cost of cultivation. Okay, so that is so then with the rise in the cost of cultivation, the income of these farmers, particularly poorer section, it will be become, agriculture will become non-viable for a larger section of farmers. So now, so there will be two kinds of trends which will emerge. That is, on the one hand, with the non-viability of agriculture, so there will be more reverse tendencies. That is, small farmers will start leasing out land to large farmers. Apart from that, with the moving out of agriculture, so so then people will look for, and farmers, particularly small and marginal farmers, will look for alternative employment opportunities. That is, they'll move out of agriculture, uh, and as a result of that, so the income of these households will be affected. Now, in case of, if we look at the employment and also in terms of wages, because then when a large workforce is moving out of cultivation, they might, some of them may remain agriculture workers. And now in that case, what will happen is that this will not only affect, so these laws are not going to affect the employment in agriculture sector, but they will also affect the employment in non-agriculture sector. That is, for if we look at the case of a large number of workers in areas where we have well established and the full functioning or better functioning APMC mandis, there are a large section of workers from rural areas and also from the urban areas work in these APMC mandis as manual workers, as paledars or other manual workers. So first and foremost, if these APMC mandis are abandoned, so therefore there will be direct fall in the employment in APMC, that is employment provided by APMC mandis. Apart from that, if we move towards contract farming, so there will be more and more export oriented production of agriculture, which will also be more mechanized. Now, in our recent survey, in a survey which we did, where there was export-oriented production in Rajasthan, so the one of the district which we surveyed, we found that there was a sharp decline in employment because of when there was a movement or when there was shift in the area uh, uh, from one crop to more export-oriented crop. Okay, so that as a result of that, there was a fall in employment for both for male and female, but in that case, there was a larger decline in case of female workers. That is, female workers, for them, the days of employment fell down by 50% because female were primarily engaged in harvesting, post-harvesting operations. So there's a gender division even in terms of work. There's a wage. There is women in general get lower wages for their daily wage work, even if they perform the similar kind of work. Their wage rates are lower, but in case of female workers, so then there was a sharper decline because women were largely involved in harvesting operations, and because of the shift in the area, so then their employment got adversely affected by this. And so in general, when we talk about that is impact of these laws, that it will affect both male and female workers in both primary in both the principal classes in the rural areas, in both peasantry as well as the manual workers. Now, in this, if we talk about the peasant, in among the peasant households, a large amount of work is done by the female workers, that is, women in the household, and they do not only perform. And that work in agriculture done by women worker is not accounted, is invisible. That is not accounted, and a very small. In terms of ownership, if we look at the statistics, the agriculture census of 2015-16 points out that there are only 14% households which are female operated, which they have classified female operated households. And in terms of ownership, it is even smaller. That is, and how do we get to these female operated households, or if we talk, is some people classify it as a feminization of agriculture, that largely happens on account of when there is a migration of male workers. There are two ways through which it happens. First is through the migration of male workers for the employment, and other is if there are suicides. And as we know, there have been about 3 lakh suicide in our country, farmers suicide, and widows of these households were not given any assistance or any provisions were not provided for their livelihood by the state. So now that happens only on 2 accounts, and though through inheritance, there is only a very small proportion of land is given to women through inheritance. So now, given that there is that women have been working in agriculture for decades and for centuries, but their work is not recognized. Now, there was one bill which was how do we classify female farmers? There was one bill which was proposed by Professor M.S. Swaminathan. It was in 2003, and the bill was Women Farmer Entitlement Bill. Sorry, it was in 2011, Women Farmer Entitlement Bill 2011. Though this bill later on got lapsed after 2 years in 2013, it got lapsed. But what he classified women farmer, he said that irrespective of marital status or ownership of land, if any women, if she's engaged in agricultural activities, even partially, not even occasionally, so therefore she should be classified as female farmer. But though this bill got lapsed later on, but in this bill he also insisted upon, or he proposed equal land rights as well as equal access to credit, etc. So he proposed equality in terms of land, credit, etc. So now, throughout this, in this particular protest, if we look at that, uh, a, on the one hand, because after these farm laws, where there has been women have been only involved, I mean, their recognition has not been done. Okay, they have been largely invisible. Their work has been invisible, that is unrecognized. And after these laws, the female in particular will be more marginalized because of their exclusion from the market. And that will happen on account of because they have lower mobility, lower educational level, and gender division of our society. And so therefore, they will be more marginalized after the implementation of these bills. And when we are talking about that is when there is there's going to be fall, and as I told you just recently, just about a study in one of the district which we have done in Rajasthan. We witnessed that when there's a shift towards more export oriented crop, as a result of that, there was a 50% fall in the wage employment which females were receiving. So now, with that, there was a sharp decline in the income of those households. So now, that further, what did that result into? That further resulted into more exploitative work condition of women in general in that village. So now, in this protest, is uh, what is important to witness is that there have been women from very diverse backgrounds, from different classes, not only from peasant classes, but also from manual worker households are coming together because this has been a question of survival for them. So now this protest has also been able to politicize a large section of women, and which is evident in terms of their number here, not only at the protest site, which are on Delhi borders, but even in Punjab. The women are mainly who are not only continuing the protest there, but are also sustaining that protest at different sites. So they have been main participants, which initially they were very hesitant, and Sangeet will be able to elaborate more about that. But after participating, there have been more politicization of women, resulting into not only more participation, but also more active participation of women. And recently, which was also evident when they participated in Mahila Kisan Divas on 18th of January, so there were a large section of women which came with their generations. There were three generations from a particular household, or there were two generations from many households. Okay, so then they came here with their generations to participate in these protests, and now these protests have been increasingly where uh, they've been able to assert that is these protests have to be more inclusive, that is by raising their voices against, or by asserting that is their demand to not to raise non-inclusive slogans, not to give non-inclusive speeches, or to sing those or objectify women in their songs. So they have been able to assert this through these in these protests as well, and which was very evident on even on the day of Mahila Kisan Divas. So there where they not only managed the entire event, but they also asserted this again and again. That is, this is a question of their survival. And along with that, they wanted this protest to be non-inclusive. So that is, it is, so include women. So that is, so they could assert that right there. So now, if we talk about that is women, apart from this, Sangeet will be able to elaborate more about women's participation in the protest. But apart from this, that is from the household where men are sitting here on the protest side, particularly in Delhi. So now women are carrying out agriculture activities back home as well. Okay, they have been continuously involved with agriculture, and so along with that they are participating in the local protest, and they are also continuing with the agriculture activities, which has highlighted presently, which has also been they have been able to highlight their role in agriculture during these protests. So that's it. Means I'll stop here, and then Sangeet can elaborate on their participation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. You explained so well about those laws and the defects those laws possess. And apart from that, the thing which you have said, that we are disowning the engagement of women in agriculture from centuries, that's also very important for us to know as the students of WDC cell. So now for Sangeet ma'am, I'll ask her three questions and I'll ask in a row so that there will be no interruption in between. So the first question is, ma'am, since you have been documenting the history of land rights in Punjab, what is the position of Punjabi women farmers in their class with respect to the ownership of land they work on, their share in agricultural income, and autonomy in decision making? The second question is, ageist and sexist outlook towards the protesting women in popular culture and mass media has continually led them to being represented as allies in the movement and not resisting members of the community who are by the farm laws as much as male farmers. How do you see this culture and political suppression of women's identities and the refusal to accept their choice and autonomy? The third question is, can we see women's resistance within the entire farm law protest as a mass level feminist protest against the patriarchal appropriation and silencing of women's voices? At the same time, should the ongoing protests be seen as a monolith, or is there heterogeneity within the movement which the media hasn't succeeded in portraying? Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Kiran, for the questions, and thank you, Navpreet. You have explained, the three farm laws and somewhat the women participation. Um, okay, so uh, I looked at the questions and I felt that we today, in this half an hour, let's unlearn what we have learned so far about, women participation, especially the feminism part of that. Because if we are on a raised platform, we won't be able to see the grounds up work that has been done by men and women and the movement in the past 6 months. So it's more like, I'm going to build it up very organically so that you understand, how they are participating, how they are contributing, and how the tradition and culture plays a part in their autonomy of decisions. And, if they're not given the land, then what else is given? So, what happens when a daughter is married off? When she's married off, the family knows, the parents know that when she's going to go into the in-laws' house, she's going to be oppressed. That's a given. That's not an assumption, that's a set identity. So, what they do is she's given gifts on various festivals and occasions. There are some festivals that are like specially for giving her gifts. And that is because when she is the daughter of these parents, as long as she's not given the land right directly, but she's compensated for that all along. And why? Because the social structure, the construct is such that she's gonna be oppressed once she's married off. Um, and what else do they do? Once she's married off, first of all she's married off into a well-to-do family. And what is a well-to-do family? The family that has more land. So once she's married off to that family, her husband has like he's given like a bigger status. He's the fufaji. He is given the veto power over the household matters of his wife's parents. Anything if she wants to exercise a decision, she's gonna either exercise it directly, because once she's married off, her status raises in the parental household also. And but back in the in-laws house, she lives in a power structure in which she is the lowest entity. As she grows older, if she has the sons, her position is gonna raise step by step. Once she marries off the son and she has a daughter-in-law, her status is the highest. But all along this, she and her husband is given a lot of respect in the parents' family. So this is how not giving the land directly works by compensating in return in these various forms. And now when let's go into the in-laws house. In-laws, what happens in the in-laws house? So there are traditions that when the husband sells the crop, he is going to hand over the salary to the wife. There is a particular saying when there is a newly married couple. Mostly, the matriarchs in the in-laws house, they mostly tell the husband, listen, be very nice to her, and the day you get the salary or the day you get the pay, just give it to her. So although probably gives a part of it to her, or gives all of it to her, or doesn't give. There is another way in which he is gonna compensate for what she's not getting either from her parents or in the in-laws house. If he's not going to give it directly, then he's going to buy her gold. Gold is something, it's an asset that is completely owned and operated by women. It is a form of compensation for what is not given to her directly. When we look at the women of the dominant and the oppressed classes, one thing is apparent: women don't own land. In the recent Mahila Kisan Divas, there is a women leader from one of the farm unions. She is the state president of women wing of BKU Krantikari. She said something very beautiful towards the end, and it resonated with me so much because it had so much to look forward to, because the current movement is about repealing the three farm laws. It's not about anything else, although there are so many things happening inside, and it's just a peek into what's happening on the back end, what's happening on the insides of the minds who are currently involved, who are currently protesting. She said towards the end of her speech that, listen, you all women are here. We have nothing to lose because there is nothing in our names. We don't own anything. So let's fight fearlessly. It, in a way, kind of, gives you a peek into, how women have been looking at this protest, how they are a participant in the protest. They are not allies. They are an active member of the whole movement. But at the same time, they realize that there are bigger fights coming up because there is so much awareness that has happened over the 6 months, and I'll go over the awareness also. Okay, when we look at, let's just look at the farm work. So farm work has different different activities that make up farming. The first one is, putting the seeds, that is done by a laborer. And then there is more like irrigating the field, and then plowing the field. And then the third one is harvesting, and fourth one is selling the crop. Someone who irrigates, someone who plows, and someone who sells the crop. These three activities majorly make up the farming. The farmer, the term farmer is someone who does these three activities, at a broader level. Anyone else who does something else, anyone else who is, putting the seeds in, who is spraying the insecticides, who is, picking cotton, who is traditionally, women used to do wheat and rice harvesting. Now we have harvesters, so that's already, there is a lot of automation in there. So anyone who does those kind of work is not a farmer. Those are laborers. And within that labor category activities, women laborers work on the jobs which pay less, and men do the jobs which pay more. Like spraying insecticides is an example of what a man laborer will do, but picking cotton is something that a female will do. So there are those divisions also within, the farming activities. But regardless, regardless of all of this, at home, the woman is in charge. And this becomes apparent from, I'll just give you a small peek into the microfinance scam, because it's important to look into it, because it gives a lot of insight into how women are exerting their decision making, how they look at the economy of the household, or and how they get caught up into various things. What happens is women want to augment the family income. Marginal farming families, small to marginal farming families, and the labor families. in the rural areas to augment the family income, what they do is take smaller loans and, let's say, buy a cow or something to sell milk. Or they open up a small boutique or beauty parlor. But during the lockdown, two things happened. Demonetization happened. And all these women, when you talk to them, they talk about demonetization first. They are like, demonetization really, really broke our back. Why? Because they were making rudimentary savings throughout, and they were, and suddenly, demonetization happened and their savings were useless. But those savings, in a way, gave them so much power. Excuse me, is there a problem? Oh, okay. Someone needs to put it on mute. Could you please do it? This is, yeah, great. Thank you. Okay. So demonetization. These women, why they are so much against Modi, why they are so much, if you talk to them, they know what is happening politically because it has affected them directly. And what were they doing with that rudimentary income? They were, giving gifts to the daughter, buying gold for the daughter, or marrying someone off, or medical emergencies, or, smaller gifts for someone else, just to have that kind of power over, and not to have asked the husband, oh, I want to give this thing to someone else, or I want to buy this thing for myself, so that she can just do it on her own. But demonetization took that power away from her. So when you talk to the rural women, they talk about demonetization. The second thing that they talk about is the lockdown, because the lockdown also took that power and assertion and authority and identity away from them, because they have lost that augmented income. They were driving it. And because this scam, so what happened was they were not able to return the mortgage. So the microfinance companies increased the interest rates to 100%. And then they came knocking on these women doors, and they tried to confiscate the household items. And then something interesting happened. They wanted to confiscate the items, but the loans were in the name of the women, but the items, TV, furniture, fridge, these were the bills were in the name of the men, but not women. So the companies couldn't confiscate the household items. All they could get away were the utensils, because then her arena is the kitchen. And kitchen has utensils, and you don't look at the bills for utensils. They just simply confiscated those things. So this microfinance scam kind of boiled over in June, and these women came together. They organized themselves under the ambit of various unions and women wing, and they had big rallies in Patiala and Mansa. And at the end, when I recently talked to someone about microfinance, they told me there are around 60,000 women, 60,000 women, regardless of the caste, but of course from marginal small farming families and labor families, who are victims of that microfinance companies and high interest rates, not able to pay back. And now they have made a committee to, ask the companies to, let off some of the loan amount. But this tells us that women do a lot, and how they exert their authority inside the house. When these women, when anti-farm law agitation began, because some of those women were also from the farming families, they started going to the agitation. And the labor families, those women also started going to the agitation with them. And that's where this cross awareness happened. When you talk to these women from rural areas and you ask them, so, why are you here and protesting. Early on, I used to talk to them. First of all, in September, women were really wary of talking. They never talked. They did not give permissions to click pictures. But as it progressed, they knew what was going on because they were not allowed, but they took this liberty to go to the protest sites themselves and listen to the speakers there, which added to their awareness of what's going on in this country overall, not just farm laws, but also what is happening to our activists and what is CAA, all those things, you know. So this kind of raised their awareness that no, it is not just their problem. It is Modi is actually problematic. The government is, the policies are actually problematic. So let's move on to my notes. I'm just gonna check them real quick. Yeah. I asked some of the women, and they always talk about how their daughters and their daughter-in-laws are educated, but they're not able to get the jobs. The unemployment of their daughters and daughter-in-laws, and you know, it gives you so much to trust in rural women and their authority and their commitment to being progressive when they talk about their daughter-in-laws, their education, their employment. And one of the women said, you know, my daughter-in-law, she spent all these years studying and doing PhD. Now she doesn't have a job and she even doesn't know how to make a roti. But I would much rather have her find a job. I have told her, don't make rotis, concentrate on finding a job. But our country is not, you know, our policies have shifted towards not giving her a job. So now I have asked her to file for Canada and go to Canada. So you see how women want their daughters and daughter-in-laws to progress, find their own identities, and you know, exert and assert their presence by finding a job rather than doing household work. And those are rural women. I'm not talking about anyone from small towns or cities. These are hardcore village women. And politically, it has actually, you know, sometimes when things happen at various levels, people get politically aware themselves. The task becomes really easy. You don't have to write anything for them. They just know that things are happening and the awareness is happening on the other side. On the Shahra, I went to Sangrur railway station. There was a huge protest going on. There were a lot of women there, which was new to that protest site because women were not participating in big numbers early on. But now, I mean, the Shahra time onwards, there were a lot of women coming out. And one of the women, she's like 60 years old, and she told me, you know, today is Dussehra and my daughter is protesting in Patiala. She's in a rally because she got this government school teacher job, but they are not paid any salaries. So now they're protesting, and the police and the ruling Congress government is beating them up. So you can see this double face of women, know the double face of political leaders also, that if farm laws are now, you know, anti-farm law narrative is in, and Congress is saying, okay, you know, we are against farm laws, but back home, anything which is not making news, they are using that opportunity to still suppress the voices. And women know that better because they are the ones who educate. They are the ones who take their kids to the school, and they're more closely associated with what is happening, what is going to happen to the child who is now educated and is not able to find a job. And among all of this, it's not just that they are politically aware. I have kind of came to realize that they are more fearless than urban women when it comes to asking, demanding for their rights. And there is a particular reason in that. The rural women, they get together, they organize, And now, in these 6 months, women have been like, protesting in front of DC office. I talked to so many of those leaders in different, protests, and they're like, this happened. And then we made this Sangharsh committee, and then we crowd DC's office, or we crowd this political leader. So the movements, the smaller movements, I have talked to microfinance scam people. I have talked to the victims of suicide families. I have talked to, DTF, women who are teachers. I have talked to Anganwadi people, and all of them, something which is common in all these organizations and women is that they crowd DC office, they crowd political leaders' house. There is so much empowerment in simply getting together and raising a collective voice, and and give a challenge to these people who we call leaders. So the movement in itself and women have taken this power in their hands, and they know that whatsoever leader comes into power, they have the real power in organizing. And this is where I think there is, some sort of a chasm between the rural women and the urban women. Urban women, their fights are more individualistic. Their fights are more like inward looking. They are more about their identity, the individual identity. And beyond that chasm is the rural women, where it's not about their individuality, individual identity, but a collective identity. So the protest, as I have seen it from September onwards, I have realized that this is a big difference between the two parts. And that's why when I said that we will need to unlearn a few things today, it was because I have come to realize that there is a lot that we need to see differently. We need to put up a different lens and analyze it from a different angle. I'm going through my notes, just gonna take 1 minute. So when we and I also feel like the movement is like the internship time. This is their internship going on. Once this is over, they're gonna be on a full-fledged job, because it has prepared the ground for them to take up bigger leadership roles. There are calls to the unions from villages where women are asking the unions to establish women units and women wings. There are many unions who didn't have women early on, but now, taking into account the way and the number of women participants in the protests, especially in Punjab, that the unions have decided, those unions which are very, very male centric, to actually nurture women leaders. And there are two major unions which have more women power with them, which is BKU Graha and BKU Dakonda. They have made like this trickle down thing where, the female leader at the state level is gonna, prepare a female leader at the district level, and then, at block, and then at the village level. So there are women leaders being prepared, and that those are being prepared now, today. And that's why I'm saying that it's an internship for the women who are packing themselves into buses and trolleys and going to either the border protests or are going to, let's say, Barnala, Bathinda, Mansa protest. Now they know each and everything about the country politically. They know their economic and social rights. It's just that the movement is about repealing the farm laws, but the women have the awareness what they want next. So that's why I'm saying they're going to be on a full-fledged job once this is over. Let's talk about the next question, which is more about ageism and sexism. When when I look at older men and women at the protests, and the thing is, the way popular culture portrays, older men and women, I think it's not out of uh, I think they are not doing any injustice in there, because early on the face of the protest has been these old people. And when these old people, men and women, come out and are participating, and when their pictures come up and let's say some songs visualization, I don't feel it out of the place. I think it doesn't do any kind of injustice to the older people who have been participating. But the proportion of women participation in popular culture, that I feel is, is less, and the way they make them participate or show them being a participant in the movement is very, there is a sexist portrayal of how they are participating um, in most of the songs. But then the thing is, we can't expect this social change of looking at women apart from being mothers and sisters and wives. We don't give them like an individual, identity. And the other thing is that women don't want that individual identity either, because when you talk to them, they say that they are there for their husbands and their sons, and for their land right, but they are also there because there is a bigger challenge of their daughters and daughter-in-laws not getting the job. So it's like a mix of both the things. um, and then the last one is, when we talk about the feminist perspective in the movement, I feel like the participation of women is not, in the movement, is not confrontational. I understand that from an urban perspective, a confrontation is expected, but the primary focus is the repeal of the laws. And what happens is, we on the outside want to see them differently, but they're also not a mass of women who are simply allies. They are awareness channels now, as I explained earlier. But let's go more into like stepwise. For example, they have normalized their presence in the movement by being present. In September and early October, someone was telling me in one of the villages, he was saying, my mother wanted to go, and she said, today I'm gonna accompany you to the protest site. And I told her, what will you do there? Just, stay home and do your household work. But then he said that the farm union leaders, they used to come and address the protest sites and say, we won't be able to win this movement, win this fight without our women. And that's when they brought the women out. So this whole idea that men are leading it, yes, they were traditionally leading it, but they are also doing a lot to bring the women out. And then this guy also told me that then they started taking the village women out to the protest site more, and they saw that they were very, disciplined, and they would listen to the leaders so intently, and they were keen on knowing what is happening overall. That at that point in November, before the movement went to Delhi, he said that we now feel that this movement was really, really incomplete without our women in there. So their presence is normalized in the movement by them being present. And as I told, we now have, way more, like hundreds of units being established by the unions in the villages for women. And they have prepared a ground for themselves to become leaders. And a very important aspect early on, not just in the Delhi border protests, but early October, men were cooking langars. and women were given space and given time to just sit down and listen to the leaders, because that's what the leaders told. Women don't need to come here to cook, they need to sit down and listen to us, so that they know what is going on. And that has also schooled men and households and families to not police the women when they want to go out to the protest. So, in most of the traditional union belt areas, the women are now not being policed at all. But in some of the areas where there are newer units, or the organizations are new, the unions are new, themselves new, they have just introduced themselves to an area, let's say Ludhiana's area, there they are still facing challenges with the families giving permissions and not allowing. Um, and then another important aspect is how women, I went to one of the protests in Sangeet district, and there was an announcement on the stage where they said, this from this village, 20,000 rupees, and then they, listed out the names. They said the names out loud. For example, Satnam Kaur gave 5 rupees, and Sukhvinder Kaur gave 5,000 rupees. So it was like whatever they could give, whatever they could contribute, they contributed, and they made it known. So it was, I think it was a huge step in itself of making their name known on a stage, that they have given the funds for the union. Um, and when the movement went to Delhi, men kind of then acknowledged their own privilege, and they acknowledged how, they were making their wives and mothers to cook, like on orders, like, my friends are coming in 5 minutes, get the food ready. And in the protest side, now that they are cooking, they have realized the worth of, a woman's labor at home, the cooking labor. And they verbally say that we never realized that it was so much work, and now we wake up in the morning and we are like, oh, what are we gonna eat for breakfast? And then we take 1.5 2 hours preparing breakfast, and then by the time it's 3 p.m. we are thinking, we still have to make dinner, but what are we going to eat in dinner? And then they take 2 hours making dinner. So they have, through these activities, very organically, they have come to realize their own privilege of being a man in the house, and how women's labor is unappreciated. But this knowledge, this acknowledgement is very organic in nature, and it's not going to go away sooner. And the movement is not a monolith. There are solidarities happening between castes and classes. For example, leaders are living at the borders, and the female student leaders, they are doing work at, let's say, 10 11 p.m. Looking at them, the base, the organized base that is there, they see them, and then they are like, oh, we can also bring out our young women, who are marriageable age women. They can also come and become a part of this movement, because it's safe. And look at these women, they are doing great work. And I met 3 young girls. They were practicing Sikh. They were like 13 14 years old. They came from some village in Patiala. They were doing langar seva, they were praying, and they were going along with the religious processions at the Delhi border. But then when I talked to them, they talked to me about Swaminathan report. So you see the contrast, and you look at them and you don't expect them to know anything, because I think we have educated, we have learned something else from being, intellectuals and everything. But when you talk to them, you realize that you don't know anything, because we have been assuming so much about them. So in a way, religion, assertion of rights, and solidarities are running in parallel in the movement. And the two classes, the dominant class and the oppressed class, who are at the loggerheads in the villages for the oppressed class rights, they are now standing, side by side in the movement, fighting a bigger oppressor. There is a labor union leader from from Sangrur. Her name is Paramjeet Kaur Longowal. I talked to her recently. She told me, I asked her, so, why do you go to the protest? She said, I go uh, not because we are some sort of servants of farmers. We go because today farmers are being oppressed. And we have been fighting oppression for long. We want to give our know-how and our tools to the farmers who are now being oppressed because they were a dominant class early on. And I think this in itself is a revolutionary step. This in itself is revolutionary solidarities. And it doesn't mean that back in the village, back home, the fights are going to be over. They are still going to go on because the class which is oppressed today, but is a dominant class back home, still needs to realize that it is suppressing someone else's rights and it needs to give those rights back. So, but I'll summarize, and it is that the fights for the rights will continue to go on back home, but the forces are in alliance that are in loggerheads back home, but are now allied with each other in the movement. And this alliance is dignified. And that is pretty much it from me.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your insights. You explained us so well about the cultural and social barriers in the path of women progress, and how these barriers are suppressing their voices since centuries. And I can relate very much about the things which you have said earlier about being a women in a farming family, the things of marriage, that we are not given land but the compensation in the place of land. But I'm happy that through this protest the position of women's in fighting for their voices are normalizing, and the normalization is done by men itself. So that's maybe a development in in a societal organization. So now the stage is open for question answer. If any audience or anyone is having any question or want to present anything from their side, you can speak, and or if you want to write, you can write it in the chat box. Is there any question?
Um, Kiran, I have a question.
Okay, Harshita, go on.
Hi, good evening, ma'am. This question is for both the speakers. The recent development that happened today was the center has decided to defer the implementation of the three laws for a period of 18 months. And now the committee that has been set up by the Supreme Court will look into it, and after 18 months, probably a decision will be taken. So, essentially, what does that mean for the protest? Is this actually a development that is for the benefit of our farmers, or is it just a way of suppressing the protest so that it doesn't resurface?
Navpreet, do you want to go first?
No, you answer, and then if there is something left, I'll answer.
Okay. Yeah, I have read that. First of all, the committee that Supreme Court formed, it has just taken the members who have already taken a stand for the farm laws. It doesn't make sense to have biased people on the committee, so committee is pretty useless. The second part is that today the Supreme Court said no. The government offered that they are going to postpone the implementation for 1.5 years. I think it's just delaying tactic, which is that today the movement is at its strongest, and they just are under pressure because of the Republic Day, and they don't want to actually look at the constitutionality of the laws itself, which, if we look at, they should be repealed, because they are not constitutional in nature. But the government doesn't want to do that because it doesn't want to go on the back foot because of their own ego and a precedent that has been set on the image of the BJP government itself. And I have also read the press statement released by the unions that we are not going to go on the back foot just because there is a 1.5 year delay on this one. We are not just going to delay our movement. We want the total repeal of laws and nothing less than that.
I agree with whatever Sangeet said, that this is the government is acting under pressure right now. The movement is at its peak, and the only these tactics are used to delay, so that since there is a larger mobilization being done for 26th March, and they are insisting on doing that, and therefore the government is trying to delay it. So these are just the tactics for that, and farmer unions are very firm on it. There is nobody who is saying that we are even going to consider it, because and even they have the statement which they issued soon after Supreme Court's committee. So they also issued a statement that since this committee has already presented their views, means members of the committee have written about their views on these farm laws, and since they are favoring, so then they are already clear that what the committee is going to give as recommendation. So they are so then there is no expectations from the committee also, and they have decided, even in the recent statement which they issued yesterday, that is they are going to go on with their planned agitation.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any other question? I think there are no more questions. So now I want to invite Aditi, the president of Women Development Cell Miranda House, for a vote of thanks. Over to you, Aditi.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Um, Good evening, ma'am. Sangeet ma'am, Navpreet ma'am. First of all, thank you for accepting our proposal, and thank you everyone else for joining us. It was really a very insightful session, and particularly for us because you very rightly pointed out, Sangeet ma'am, that sitting in our homes away from the ground reality, we are bound to make erroneous assumptions about people, and it's better to take a step back and to listen to narratives and to understand that feminism in itself is not a monolith. And we cannot understand feminism just in an urban, high class, a certain, in a certain perspective. And it makes us realize that the feminism of these farmers, these female farmers, is as strong as any other feminism. It's beautiful in its own way and it's inspiring for everyone. So thank you for presenting that perspective for us. And thank you, Navpreet ma'am, for delving into the intricacies of the law, because unless and until we as students understand what the law is about, just relying on the mainstream media won't help us. So both of your addresses were very important, were very insightful, and we are really glad that we got the opportunity to have you. Thank you very much once again, and thank you for everyone who were able to join us on a very short notice. We really hope that this conversation continues and that as students we are able to contribute to the protest by first understanding and by being allies and by standing with the farmers and understanding that this is not the time to step back as students when we understand that there is a curve on descent even in educational institutions. Even as students, we are not free to speak what we want, to learn what we want, to teach in classrooms what we want to teach and learn. So it's an attack on every institution, be it agriculture, be it education, be it everything else. Now is probably the time that we stand together and we understand that there is a pattern of oppression and therefore there needs to be solidarity in our resistance. Thank you for joining us. We're really grateful to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.